So, sleepiness can arise at any time on our headspace journey. More often than not, it arises toward the beginning. So, it's almost as though we've been rushing around our entire life, and all of a sudden, we pause just for a moment. And in pausing, we realize just how tired we are. It's almost like a residual tiredness. It's in the body, it's in the mind. It's almost like it's kind of oozing out of us. And the result is that sometimes, even if we don't fall asleep, we feel a little bit sleepy. So it's quite common when you sort of ask people after they've done their first few sessions, sort of, how do you feel? And it's like, well, I feel calmer, but I feel really tired. I feel really sleepy. It's really important to acknowledge that it's not the exercise or the technique that makes you feel sleepy. The technique simply provides a framework in which we see how we're feeling in both body and mind more clearly. And very often, to begin with, as I say, that is a sense of sleepiness. Now, it's really tempting to think, okay, well, there's no point in me doing this. If I'm just going to fall asleep, it's kind of a waste of time, but it's really not. For sure. If you sit down and the intention is to go to sleep, then, it's a bit of a waste of time. But as long as we sit down with the intention to follow the technique through and we then fall asleep partway through, that's okay. That's not wasted time at all. And in fact, the other information will still be going in. In fact, what usually happens is there's quite a sort of a usual common sort of pattern. And that's the first few weeks, maybe 2, 3 weeks, for some a little longer, but normally just the first few weeks. This kind of tiredness comes to the surface. We find ourselves falling asleep. But as we continue, so that happens less frequently. In fact, we may, for some people, don't really kind of experience that again after that initial few weeks. For some, it continues. So there's a few things you can do to make sure that you are less likely to fall asleep during a session. So obviously the first is time of day. If we save our headspace for very last thing at night, so much so that it's the last thing we remember to do as we're lying there in our bed before we go to sleep, then of course we're more likely to fall asleep. So find a time of day which is conducive for this kind of exercise. Avoid times of day sort of like immediately after lunch when the stomach sort of requires all our energy, and again we're more likely to fall asleep. The best time of day when the mind is brightest, although that won't be the case for everyone. For most people, is first thing in the day. We're least likely to fall asleep first thing in the day. So if that sounds okay and you're able to do it, then I would recommend getting out of bed, going to the toilet, perhaps splashing a bit of water on the face, maybe even having a glass of water, and maybe even opening the window, letting in some fresh air. So making sure that the environment itself is set up in such a way where you're less likely to go to sleep. And then of course the posture. Make sure you're sitting in such a way that you're not going to easily drift off. And then in the mind, when you feel yourself kind of sinking, sort of getting very heavy, that's okay. But once it starts moving towards sleep, a really useful technique, if you imagine either very bright sunshine or a light bulb, just something very light and bright just above your head. And if you just maintain a very soft focus on that, even just for 20, 30 seconds, it can be before, during, or after your session, it will just help lift the mind and is likely to prevent you drifting off to sleep. And it's likely to bring just a little bit more kind of energy into the body. But as I say, it usually passes quite quickly and certainly nothing to worry about at all if you do find yourself drifting off whilst you're getting some headspace.